Start with this. When somebody says The Prisoner to you, what's the first thing you think of?
Probably think of the word nightmare, because it came up so quick. And it wasn't developed. It was developing in Patrick's mind, but we were already rolling the cameras. So we were trying to get a grasp of what the series was about. And Patrick wrote the first script, Arrival, with David Tomlin. And it was really a question of sorting out, what is this village, what is this man, who are the people that's running it, what is their motives, what's his motives, where is this place supposed to be, should we let the audience know where it's supposed to be, are they the East, are they the West? I mean, all those issues were being discussed as we're shooting, which is a little scary. My biggest fear was, Patrick, I need scripts. How can I prepare a series if I don't have scripts? We've booked all these stages at MGM Studios. Stanley Kubrick's next door making 2001 and wants to devour the whole studio. So I'm fighting him every day. So we have some space to make this series. And Jack Champagne can't design the sets because he doesn't know how many sets he needs. So we need the information. Sounds like the teaser, information. We need information, but I needed it. I think it was my first reaction when you say The Prisoner. If I think about my involvement in it, it was probably a nightmare experience at the time, at the beginning. But as The Prisoner, as the show, it's still a series I'm very proud of and that people know about, and I'm glad my name's on it.
Talk a little bit about exactly what it means to be a production manager on a show like that.
As a production manager, I'm responsible for basically breaking down each script and figuring out the best order to shoot in, with a combination of exteriors and what happens if it rains. I have to make sure we've got cover sets to do that with. I have to make sure the actors are available, blah, blah, blah. At the other side of the coin is I'm totally responsible for the budgets and the money that's being spent. And all these shows had a price tag because Lou Gray got so much for The Saints, so much for The Avengers, so much for Man in a Suitcase, and so much for The Prisoner, but The Prisoner was pushing him because we were spending more than he wanted us to spend, I believe. They made all their series out the back doors of Elstree, Borehamwood, or Pinewood, or Shepperton Studios. Nobody ever traveled more than, 2 miles, 4 miles from the studio because it became expensive and dangerous. For Patrick to go 300 miles into the Welsh mountains where there's rain and mist and fog and this town which is full of tourists, we didn't have carte blanche there. So it was scary because we were committed to make the series. And in fact, it was the most expensive series being made at that time. The show was probably costing £60,000, which was probably $150,000 an episode, which is like peanuts compared to today. But at that time, it was a lot of money because The Saint was being made for probably $100,000. We were at least 40% more than all the other series. But I think I proved myself at the end of the day, so they kept me on the show. And actually, Patrick McGoohan was the first person to give me a break as a fully fledged production manager on The Prisoner. I remember meeting him in a bar in Harrow. And, he's a formidable character when you first meet him because he's a loner. He's not easy to communicate with. He's a thinker, so he's weighing you up all the time. You have to be careful what you say, not out of fear, but he's very articulate and he's very intelligent. So he's not interested in idle chat. He's always learning and eager to find out how people do things differently. I definitely know that Pat was trying to take television to another level, which was to get away from just shootouts and car chases. And Patrick was very controlling of the series because it was in Patrick's head. It wasn't from a book. It wasn't a clear idea. It was basically in Patrick's head. And I believe it was a personal journey of Patrick's too. And his rebellion against so much that was going on at that time in terms of the computer age coming in, the Cold War. He's always talking about, Russia and Checkpoint Charlie and the Americans and satellites and too much observation of us as a human race, and he was just rebelling all the time.
Patrick was rebelling. David Tomlin was rebelling.
Right.
You were rebelling.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to reveal my age. I was 25 at the time, and now we're talking about 33 years ago. And that's the 60s, the late 60s. So I was going through my own rebel period because prior to working with Patrick, I just made a film in Berlin called Quilla Memorandum, which was all about the Cold War and spies, Alec Guinness. All these spy movies were being made. Michael Caine, Funeral in Berlin. It was a James Bond. I mean, everything was spy, spy, spy. After The Prisoner, I made Clockwork Orange because I was rebelling. I was rebelling against the system. I hated school. I hated the establishment. I hated, the class structure in England. I mean, there were so many things for me to be resentful for and angry about in England at that time. And the thing that was very noticeable for me when I met David and Patrick is that they were definitely loners. They were definitely men's men. They didn't talk too much about stuff. And when they did, it was intelligent discussions. It was serious thoughts. Patrick in himself was a rebel actor, rebelling against the system in himself. Even by making The Prisoner, he was rebelling. He was doing something completely different. He was not doing the norm of typical, late night viewing. So, I don't know, we just kind of clicked. And yet we didn't talk too much about it. I just think we were emotionally in the right place to make this kind of material. So it was easy.
Well, Patrick tells a story that he had it doing Secret Agent and had come up with this other concept.
I was told, whether it's true or not, that at the end of Secret Agent, there was a party in London from which there were members of Parliament there. And someone made the remark to Patrick of, so what does a secret agent do when he retires? Meaning the actor. Patrick, inquiring, said, what do they do with secret agents when they retire? Meaning the real secret agents. And from what I'm told, this gentleman replied, we take care of them. We give them a house, we give them a car, we give them some pocket money, and that way they won't defect. Which I kind of believe. And I think that was the embryo of The Prisoner. I think that's where it all began.
When you started shooting, did you have an air date?
We started in September 66. And the first show was aired in October 67. I remember because I got married on the 21st of October and the second episode came on the 22nd. And my wife said to me at the time, I cannot believe you're watching The Prisoner. We just got married. So that's why the dates are clear for me. But so if we started in September of 66, I don't think we would have air dates. They probably didn't know how to market the series because they hadn't seen what it was. Lou Grade's company, ITC, or ATV at that time, were probably getting nervous because we weren't delivering a pile of scripts for them before we started shooting. We had sort of 4 scripts that were not completely finished, and yet here we are going down to Port Miriam. So there's probably concern about that. Let's wait. Let's see what Pat's come up with.
How did you figure out what you were going to cover, what you were going to shoot, where you were going to go?
It's very difficult. I mean, this wasn't like just setting up a secret agent show where everyone's wearing contemporary clothes, driving day-to-day cars. I mean, we suddenly had these mini-moaks with pretty little awnings, and we had all these people wearing cloaks and straw hats and badges and blazers, and the weather was never consistent, so we'd be shooting scenes one day in the sun, the next day it would be raining, so we'd have to finish that scene off and then grab another scene from another script that rain would be okay for. So it was a constant jiggling, and every night we would probably spend hours with Patrick talking about the concept. Because every day we were learning about what was in his mind, and every day he was inventing, because he wanted it to be so different. I would never get to bed before midnight. Never. I used to live in the house above number 6's, which Brian Epstein of the Beatles used to go and live in the summer, but it was a lookout over the whole bay. My bedroom was also an office. So I had to kick people out of my office so I could go to bed at night. That's how the Rover came up, gin and tonic looking up into the sky, at 10 o'clock at night.
Let's talk about the Rover image.
obviously Patrick wanted something. Whenever someone escaped, whether it was by land, sea, or air, Rover could get you. How are we going to do this, Pat? We don't have time. We start in a month's time. He goes, well, figure it out. So I got these special effects companies to come in, and I said, guys, we need one to go on water, so we're going to have to find a baby hydrocraft. We need one to go on land, and he can do a 360 in a second. We need one to go up walls, because all these special effects are looking at me, so I'm stark and raving mad. So they went away, and we started shooting these 4 episodes, knowing that we had to deal with Rover within that month. But we didn't have Rover. And Rover turned up one day on this, as a go-kart with this horrible body on it. It looked like a cake on wheels. And it was kind of embarrassing and, and also a disaster. So Pat said, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know. Let me get inside I was small enough to get inside the go-kart. And stupid enough, because once I got inside there, I couldn't move. I couldn't see where I was going. The fumes were horrendous. I think I almost died in there. And there was no control. And it just looked ridiculous. And we would have got laughed off the screen. So that was a real problem for us. And we mulled over it for about a day. And I know that we went down to that, where the ship is at the bottom of the hill. And there was a bar there, actually. That's where the restaurant was for the guests. And Patrick and I came outside with 2 very large gin and tonics and sat on the bench discussing what are we going to do with Rover. We have a problem. And I don't know how it happened, but I know I let my head back like this and looked up to the heavens, and there was our answer, because I said, Patrick, what are those up there? And he looked up, and there was these weather balloons, miles up in the air, just hovering. And we both looked at each other. Let's get some balloons. And so we got the prop man the next day running all over Port Maddock, the nearest town, buying weather balloons, all different sizes. We filled them with air. It was hopeless. They're like great big blobbing balls. Then someone came up with the idea of helium. We pumped them up with helium, put fishing wire on them, and suddenly we could maneuver this thing to bounce around, and it looked really scary. And someone said, we need a shot of that balloon coming out of the ocean. I went, how do you do that? I had divers under the ocean with helium bottles and balloons, and we kept trying to inflate them. And because these balloons would just come out of the water like a rocket. And it took us forever. It took like 3 days to get one balloon to be inflated underwater for it to come out as a whole thing. And then one of the assistant directors, Patrick, said, let's see what happens when we push this in his face. And we got Seamus Byrne, who was the AD, to do it for us, like he was being eaten or smothered or whatever Rover does. And it looked horrendous when you saw that guy's face coming through the weather balloon. So that's how Rover was born.
Were there moments when you were standing in the middle of Port Marion
Yeah.
and you thought to yourself, what are we doing?
Exactly. What are these people doing? What are all these placards? What is that Minimote? What is Rover doing here? Why are we here? I mean, Patrick would laugh about it sometimes. You know, do we know what we're doing next week, Patrick? I don't know. Let's wait, day at a time, you know. I think there were probably directors who said, if you get a call from Patrick McGowan, don't take it. Because it got around the industry. You know, they're making this series up there that is so intense and deep, and people didn't understand it, and directors like, I don't want to get fired off that show. I don't want Patrick taking over. And directors did get fired. And Patrick did take over because they lost their way. So there's a bit of a mess there somewhere, because Patrick couldn't keep doing everything all the time. So if a director had just come off the Saint, there would be a bit of the Saint in him. And then the editor would have to fix it if the material was there. So they had an awful job to please Patrick at the end, because once you put film together, that's it. That's it. You hope to God it's on the right course. Because this wasn't a series about a different story every week. This was a progressive series. This was a series that set you up from the beginning. There's going to have to be an end to this. So it had to continue on the line of, we mustn't let the audience get bored. We must keep them intrigued. We must keep them switching on the TV. And the hook always was, I will not break down, I will not give in. And changing number 2 was the secret to that. That was a very clever move on Patrick's part is that we didn't have the same number two every week trying to break him down, because that would have got really boring. We had different kinds of number twos. Number twos who prepared to go against number one and said, I want to do it my way, you know, or yes, sir, okay, I'll do what you say, or increase the dose. You mustn't do that. Increase the dose, you know. So those kind of conflicts continued, which you then enjoyed the number two character. So you wondered what the next number two was going to be like, and would he break him down?
There's one character besides the prisoner,
Yeah.
who is in almost every episode.
Little Angelo,
Yeah.
the butler.
Yeah.
I know. He's a mystery piece. He's the red herring. Is he number one? Yeah, he's great. That was another idea of Pat's. I mean, it's quite brilliant. Could you just put another wobbly into the dynamics of what we were trying to achieve with the penny farthing bike, little Angelo. Made you think about the characters. Wasn't just Patrick, number 6, and number 2 all the time. Other people were brought into it. My only confusion looking at the series 33 years later the other day was there's a lot of young people in the village. And what were they? Rocket scientists? What were they? They didn't seem to be old enough to me now to have what's worth having in this so-called environment. Some of them seem to be too young to me. You know, doctors, scientists, chemists, secret agents. I think they all should have reached a certain age before they were brought there to give all their secrets over.
How long were you actually in Port Mary?
We were there for the first month for 4 episodes. And then we would go back for weekends with Patrick on a Saturday and Sunday, or I would go down there with Pat's double, Frank Mayer, who did all his stunt work. And we would shoot bits and pieces for each show. So we probably went back there 2 or 3 times over the course of the first 13 episodes. We had to go down. I remember going down there to shoot Giants of Big Ben and stuff, and raft sequences, you know, in Many Happy Returns when he escapes on the raft. That became a nightmare for me because I had to go to the Irish Channel to shoot this raft that Patrick was on. And it was built out of real big logs. And I went out with about 10 crew on this fishing boat, and I said to this fisherman, have you got life jackets on board? He went, absolutely. I said, well, you know, I have to make sure there's a life jacket for everybody. And he went, don't worry, it's fine. It's all taken care of. Never assume. So we were out in the middle of the Irish Channel, and I had to keep going out like 60 miles because I could still see land, and I'm going to be like nowhere, 360, nothing, and Patrick's sailing towards somewhere. And we're towing this huge Contiki raft, and suddenly a storm came up. And this guy is now chugging along, and the engine of the boat catches on fire. So I go, oh my God. I said, where's the life jacket? He goes, I forgot to put them on. I went, oh, this is getting worse. He said, don't worry about it. He says, Bernie, if you have a life jacket, it means you will take longer to die. You won't last more than 3 minutes in this water. It's freezing. I went, well, thanks. It's like, and so eventually I went to the back of the boat, and the rope, the raft was pulling the back of the boat to below the waterline, and all the stanchions around were being just ripped off. I thought we were going to die out here. And all these guys were at the back throwing up. And it's like, oh, my God, I'm in charge of this. I got to do something. And I had to decide to cut that raft loose, which was not a wise thing to do. But I did. And we eventually got back 7 hours later, and I called, you know, the local police, and I said, I have a confession to make. There is a, 16-foot by 16-foot, 12-log raft floating around out there, and it probably will sink a ship if someone hits it. Well, they just went berserk. And they sent out the RAF, they sent out planes, helicopters, everything. But we never found it. Anyway, that's just one little story of what we did on location.
Is there anything that jumps out at you that you say, oh, I can't believe we did that?
Well, episode 16 was actually episode 6. And it amazes me, having just run the series once again, how episode 6 falls into the last show, and yet we were 7 months away from that. And I don't know whether Patrick did not know how to finish the series, and episode 6 gave him the idea as a springboard into episode 17, Fallout, or whether he actually knew subconsciously. It was basically about number 2 and number 6, and it was about may the best man win, and whoever breaks down the other is the winner. And because these are two great actors, and because the set was a closed set, and it was just this black room, so there's very few people in that room, it became incredibly intense very quickly. And the characters took over the people. And it got very frightening, because, especially when we did the fencing, and that is when the moment Leo McKern says, "You're scared." And McKern is like resisting violence, and eventually he does it. At that moment, it became incredibly intense. And when McGurn is winning over against number 2, and number 2 starts falling, you know, Leo McKern got into a serious heart problem. I mean, it got that intense that we had to stop filming, and we had to get Leo off the set before he had a heart attack. I mean, it was because of the performance and the characters they were playing. It got incredibly dangerous. And Patrick was really trying to break this guy down. And Leo was defending himself, not only as a character, but as a person. I mean, they became the part. And I thought, oh my God, this is episode 6. I hope it's not going to get worse, because I can't bear this. I don't want actors being taken off sets having heart attacks. and it was intense, and maybe that's why Pat chose that particular show to be the prequel to the ending, you know? It was frightening. I was frightened, because I didn't realize acting could get to that level. And I didn't realize that actors will allow characters to take over themselves. But they did. It was a very intense show.
Patrick has said that when the last show aired,
right,
he had to go into hiding for a while.
I could believe that.
Because people were very angry about how it ended.
Probably. Why would they angry? Because they didn't understand it. Yeah. And it wasn't conclusive like, you know, a storybook. You know, it's like, wow, he's left us up in the air again. You know, the public don't watch television intensely. You know, they're talking to their, how'd you get on today? It's a good show, yeah. Can you get me a cup of coffee, darling? I'll just go and get myself a beer. I mean, that's how a lot of people watch television. This series demanded that you don't go anywhere. You have to stay and watch every frame, because if you don't, you won't get it. And if you watch every frame, there's chances by the end of the show you still won't get it. And when people don't understand something, they can reject it because they're frightened, because they don't understand it, or it can be intimidating to them. I'm sure the show was intimidating to a lot of people, but they were hooked. And you mean we've watched this show for 17 episodes, you've got us in every night, you still haven't told us where the village is, you still haven't told us what secrets you had, you haven't told us anything, you know, and you're going back to your home where you got drugged in the first place so it could all happen again. You know, it's like it wasn't really cleaned up. You were left hanging. Maybe that's what he wanted.
Did you think you'd be talking about this 30-something years ago?
No way. No way. Always when I send my credits out, it's interesting. People say to me, what are your credits? And I always tag on the bottom The Prisoner, because it's television. And there's a sort of snobbery in the movie business about, oh, you did television? When I did television, they went, you can't do movies. You're television. It's like, give me a break. It's the same camera, you just got more money. But I've always been proud of The Prisoner. And it's interesting enough to me is that when I do mention The Prisoner, even the other day, I'm making this movie in Montreal, Canada, which is French-speaking. My location manager said, oh, I remember that series. It was in French, and that big white ball, it was fascinating. We watched it every week. So it had a huge audience. And so I'm glad it's still around. It was a great training ground for me, television, because it taught me how to spend money properly, and also how to make it look like a lot of money was spent. And I think that was a success of The Prisoner. We didn't have a lot of money, and with the money we had, we certainly made it look expensive, rich, vibrant, colorful, futuristic. And a lot of that was thanks to Pat's ideas and Jack Champagne, the art director. Yeah, I think those are the lessons I learned, which is to stay with the program and not panic. It's so easy to panic, but you just have to be calm and wait, and it all will reveal itself. Because Patrick knew he had to deliver these shows in 8 days. He had a handshake with Lou Grade, and he wasn't going to lose that friendship. That was a very important friendship, financially, creatively, and it gave Patrick all the freedom he wanted. He had total control, which is very rare. Studios very rarely say to any actor or director, you have total control. Patrick had it. So this is very much his series.